Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I say this is the morning podcast with Jacob and Ethan.
This is hell.
And we're live. Welcome to the Breakfast is Hell podcast. I'm Jacob BiH, your host and founder of the Breakfast is Hell podcast. I am the originator of this podcast. If someone else comes to you with a Breakfast is Hell podcast, they are lying. Counterfeit pod. This is the only legitimate podcast. And here for my guest today
Is Heidi
Heidi J.
for my second episode.
Second appearance on the Breakfast is Hell podcast.
Wow.
Your first appearance, what, 14? Is that Breakfast is Hell 14?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it was. If you haven't checked out Heidi's last appearance on the Breakfast is Hell podcast, check it out. We had a stirring conversation about Roth IRAs and abortion, which,
Yes, we did.
what else do you want to talk about over breakfast than your investment profile?
What other than that can make breakfast hell?
Right. Nothing makes breakfast hell quite like
Money
money,
and death.
money and death. Basically the same thing, right? So,
Ooh.
I don't know. We are at the Beacon Restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
The Beacon Restaurant in cloudy Wichita, Kansas. Cloudy today. Supposed to warm up tomorrow, though. I watched W.B. Fields' movie 2 nights ago. You know, like an old comedian. It wasn't funny.
Okay.
It's like one of those things where you're watching, like, I bet this was funny to somebody like 100
Sure.
years ago. But, like, for me now...
Not so much.
Right, like Charlie Chaplin is great, and like some of the old classics
Yeah.
I do still love. Buster Keaton, who's a Kansas native.
Okay.
You know who Buster Keaton is?
Uh-uh.
Oh man, his stuff is pretty short. You should watch Sherlock Jr.
I don't know if you talked with Ethan about this recently, but the last time I was up in Salina, he kind of just went on a YouTube, this one of old comedians, and just introduced me to some of them because I just
Like stand-up comedians.
stand-up comedians. Yeah.
Oh, like who did he show you?
I don't remember, Jay. Sorry.
No, like-
it was one clip after another, but it was just
Like Louis C.K. or like older, like
oh.
like Robin Williams.
No, not probably.
Like Richard Pryor.
I don't know any of their names. Jacob.
Okay. Remember any of the jokes?
No.
Oh.
I just remember being very funny in the moment.
Yeah.
And it just was like, there's things that there's distracting things that are just not worth even being distracted by. But like good comedy, just being distracted by good comedy, that's a good way to spend your time. If you just want to go home and watch YouTube, then that's maybe a good one to do.
I think there are better and worse ways of killing time. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
for
there
sure.
are like more content-rich ways, like a good movie, a good hour of stand-up,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to like clicking through a news website or like you know Facebook and.
Well, yeah, social media really of any kind.
See, you gotta
Just
mute.
sucks up your
You
time.
gotta mute everybody on Facebook.
I got rid of mine a while ago.
Oh yeah, you're not even on Facebook
Nah.
anymore. Yeah.
I was on and off of it for a long time. But
It's addictive. It's addictive.
ultimately, what I determined is just like, this is not enriching my life in any way.
Yeah.
And like the benefits in Facebook of just like, kind of just like knowing what's going on in other people's lives that I just don't keep in contact with anymore.
Right.
In the end, like that's not a good use of my time either. It's kind of just being nosy a little bit.
Well, and I think there's something unhealthy too to like. Generally, if you don't live in a place where somebody lives and you're not close enough to them to like call them every once in a while,
Right.
They eventually become like a smaller and smaller part of your psyche.
Yeah.
But with Facebook, like with people you keep tabs on,
Yeah.
because I'm a stalker.
Thank you.
Oh wow,
No.
Heidi, what did you get?
I got the horseshoe.
The horseshoe.
And it's huge. I
It
should have just
looks-
asked for it to go
yeah,
box immediately.
that looks like a heart attack on a plate.
It most certainly is.
Yes, in a good way.
He is
It's a good
risen,
kind of heart attack.
hallelujah.
He is risen, hallelujah. Jesus would have wanted me to eat this.
Yeah, he liked breakfast.
Um,
Anywho's,
what were we
oh
talking
yeah,
about?
so what determined it for me, like you were just saying, if these people aren't people that I text or call or that I keep in contact with, I don't need to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And sure, it's like nice, but it's not worth my time. Ultimately, There's better ways to employ my time, and I did not have the discipline to mitigate it well, where I really only spent a small amount of time on it, and it wasn't something that I wanted to be on all the time. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I used to be that way. Like, I would like habitually winnow out my friends and like only post things, that I really wanted people to see, like whatever.
Yeah.
And then when I had to Kim Jong-un this baby, when I put in my 5-year plan of world domination, and it's like, okay, we're gonna start with this podcast. Then it's like for someone who's trying to like get streams and views of whatever you're making, just like it as a weapon. So Heidi, how do you feel about the vaccine? Because I've been wanting to talk about the vaccine for a minute. Vaccine.
Great. Get it if you want it.
Okay.
If you don't want it, don't get it.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm not I don't know. Maybe you were hoping I was.
No, that's not why I asked you on the podcast, but I feel like I've been meaning to talk about it for the last, 4 podcasts, and I haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
I know I've been meaning to, get across a certain point, but it just feels weird that we haven't had any content on it.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, doing great.
Yeah, the vaccine. I'm really just not polarized on it. It's like it's available, and it's had some successful trials. I think for a lot of people, there's a good reason to get it. Or if in my mind, like my age group, I don't think it's really. I'm not gonna advocate that everyone should get the vaccine, but if you want to get it and it makes you feel more safe, and maybe you are a little more safe, then do it. But I think that I would not be an advocator of everyone should get the vaccine, period.
Okay. See, and I'm coming from a point of more people that get it, the better. But I'm trying to I feel like you're in a different camp than most people I've talked to over the last week or two.
Sure.
Because I feel like there are people who are obstinately refusing to get it or even consider getting it.
Right. Yeah.
And refusing to admit its benefits.
Sure.
And to a degree that because I feel like from these people I heard conspiracy theories at the start, then I heard concerns about the trials, then I heard concerns about fetal tissue, then I heard concerns about fertility.
Right.
And it's just if you've got 5 different reasons for something and your reason keeps changing every time I talk to you, you're probably just scared or you're just being obstinate.
Yeah.
And that I don't have much truck with.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite to me the benefits of getting it are so obvious. It's if you have a rock in your shoe, maybe COVID for someone who's sub 30 is having a rock in your shoe. That's as much trouble as it's going to be for you.
Right.
But wouldn't it be nice not to have a rock in your shoe?
Yeah.
And also let's say the rock in your shoe can cause someone else to lose their foot somehow. If you just take the rock out of your shoe, you don't have to worry about maybe somebody else losing their foot.
As far as, I guess, have you kept up with the death numbers, rolling death numbers that COVID has caused?
Oh, yeah.
Until this point. And in Sedgwick County, at least, thank you. Not very many people have died of COVID-19. So
Thanks.
we're
coming up on 3 million worldwide, and that's verified. The actual deaths in, say, South America
are probably higher.
And Africa are probably much higher, right? So, what the actual toll is. Third leading cause of death in the U.S. last year, with everything we did, it was still the third leading cause of death.
Yeah.
So, now I will say that if you watch the death chart, it's kind of funny because cases have plateaued for a couple weeks, but the death chart just keeps going down. As soon as you started vaccinating old people, it's kind of amazing how just the deaths were over.
Right.
Which is so, because really the risk of mortality is predominantly, almost exclusively in an older generation.
Right.
Right. So getting the chances that you're going to die from it if you're sub 60 and not overweight, very, very low.
Slim, yeah.
Right. But I think the risk of being a transmitter of it, because it doesn't give you perfect immunity to vaccine, right? So you're an old person, you can still, in a world where all the old people get vaccinated and none of the young people do, you're still...
Old people will still die from it.
Right.
But in my mind, I don't know. old people will still die from it, but since most people have already gotten vaccinated, most of the older generation has already gotten vaccinated.
I think I was reading from the CDC this morning, 1 in 3 adults, either 30, I think it's 30, no, it's 33% of the entire population, so it must be a higher percentage of adults that have gotten at least one shot.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So
Maybe I'm being too blasé.
Well, and
but
I mean, like, I wouldn't get the AstraZeneca. You know what I mean? Like, the AstraZeneca's risks to me, I think last I read it was 1 in 100,000 chance of getting blood clots in the brain, which, like, for me, a 0.001 chance of something like brain blood clots, not worth it. But, like, everything else I read about the other vaccines, it's just like...
unlikely to really negatively
Well, I mean, it's
affect
just
me.
like the flu vaccine, right? Like, the chance of an allergic reaction from the Pfizer or Moderna is 5 times higher than the flu vaccine. But that's 5 times a very, very, very tiny number.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So, like...
And that's kind
And
of
I'm
why
also-
I'm not trying to, like, put myself on a hill that I can't back off of.
Right.
The vaccine
And I
was...
understand wanting to wait a little bit longer. I understand that, too.
In my mind, it's like, I'm just going to wait and see what happens a little bit. And maybe there are negative effects from the vaccine that they didn't foresee because they did have an accelerated testing period,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Like,
they used the same trial system that they use for every vaccine. You have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But usually those phases, for a couple reasons. One is they're not usually in a hurry, the companies.
Yeah.
But 2, it's also like it takes a long time to get enough people to fill up each of those phases, get
Yeah.
enough volunteers.
Yeah.
So, like, the phases happened more quickly than they usually do, but they were still the same testing regimen, if that makes sense.
I don't think it was the same testing regimen across the board. At least in
What
the
do you mean?
beginning, when the vaccine was first being rolled out, there was a suggestion that if you were pregnant or you expected to become pregnant,
You don't get it.
you shouldn't get
Right,
it
because
they didn't do tests on...
Right.
Right.
So they won't give you permission for it if you're pregnant or expecting to become pregnant because they have to do a separate trial for that. It's
and
like
that
for
separate
kids.
trial would normally be done, like if they were if a vaccine was being tested before the general public that wasn't accelerated, those tests would generally be done before that was given to the public, right?
Sure. I think I may be wrong on this, but I think they generally do separate clinical trials for pregnant women.
Gotcha.
Like for children, there's a separate trial, and for pregnant women, there's a separate trial. Because like something that is fine for the general population can have unexpected effects on a pregnant person. So you want to be super careful. Also like fetal defects too. So like they have to do a separate trial for that. And for children, yeah.
Right.
But
So in my mind, it's just like, I just don't feel any urgency to getting it before I feel comfortable getting it.
right.
And likely for me, which maybe this will change, I don't know. I try very hard not to use never or always.
Sure.
But it's likely that after time passes, even if the vaccine hasn't shown to like make you turn into a green monster, I don't know that I would have reason to get it later. So
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, but why? Like, it seems like obstinance. Like, I get the flu shot now because I got tired of getting the flu every year. I got, like, the flu 3 years straight.
and you were like, no thank
I was
you.
like, I'm done with this. I'm like, oh, great, another week where I'm laid up on the couch, like, just having chills. Like, I'm done with this.
That's
you know?
crazy. You got it 3 times in a row.
I got it
though.
3 years in a row. I got it 1 year in Kansas City, the first year I was in Prague, and then the third time I got it was the worst of the 3. Because, like, because the first time I, like, was sick for a day or two. Second time I was sick for a day or two. And the third time, like, legitimately the whole week. Yeah, like October 2019. Which made me think in the back of my head maybe I had already had COVID, which turned out not to be the case. But,
I've also already had it.
COVID,
so,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just, like, I had it too. I don't want to get sick again.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't really get very
also,
sick.
like, with the new variants, even if you got mildly sick before,
Yeah.
like, from what I've read, basically, like, the way it mutates is that, like, if you get mildly sick, you can still get reinfected with the variants, but, like, the vaccine, the way it's designed, should like protect you more against the variants if you've only had a mild case. Now, I feel like if you had moderate COVID, like the data on like your immunity is pretty darn good, which everybody likes to not talk about. You know, I'm tired of the scaremongering on this because like the data on long-term and maybe not long-term, it's been too short of time, but on medium-term immunity from a moderate to severe case of COVID, like, or even just is like exceptional.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been a lot of people ignore, and a lot of the fear mongering over the variants too has been kind of frustrating.
And Jay, I don't engage.
Yeah.
My lack of being informed is why I'm kind of blasé about it.
Yeah.
I also just
Ignorance
don't,
is bliss.
a little bit.
Yeah.
But I also don't feel like my conscience is not bothered by the fact that I don't know more about it or that I don't have a stronger opinion about it. And I trust my conscience pretty well. I trust my conscience a lot more than I trust anyone else.
Doing great. Do you feel like there's a moral imperative to get the vaccine if it can prevent death?
Yeah, I think that there's good discussion about that. I don't know that I would put myself in either camp, but I definitely see good arguments being made on both sides.
This, to tie into our last discussion.
Ooh,
So,
here we go.
as a pro-life person, you know, it's an old George Carlin joke, but like, I'm trying to remember what George Carlin's wording was. Oh yeah, like pro-life people want more babies so they can turn into dead soldiers. Like, and this is, it's not really much of a joke when you just say it. But there is this weird thing that I find frustrating, and not saying you, but with certain like elements of the
Pro-life movement.
like highly traditionalist religious right in America.
Rad Trads.
What?
Rad Trads. Radical traditionalists.
Is that a? Okay.
Those are like long skirts and
just
don't
call
show
them
your
long.
ankles and I don't know.
I mean, I don't even want to get into that. I don't know. Maybe women should cover up their ankles, man.
Maybe we would be in a different, better world.
We can get into ankles here in a minute, but because here's the thing I find frustrating is when somebody doesn't have a consistent, like, doesn't apply their beliefs consistently. Well, not even frustrating, but it makes me not give them credence because,
Sure.
like, if you believe that like all life is sacred and should be protected at all costs, then, and I think we talked about the death penalty on that last podcast.
We did.
Then,
yeah.
like, if you are that pro-life, you should also be against the death penalty. You should be against war and pretty much anything except like an extremely necessary case. You should be like for medicine or for medical interventions that like prolong or like help keep life in existence
Sure.
in so much as you're capable of doing. So like I find it very frustrating when you find like very pro-war, anti-vax, pro-life people because in that case it's like, well, you're not really like a thinker. You're just like a regurgitation of like opinions that your crowd is like spilling out. Yeah. It's not real. Yeah.
I mean, it's a sad truth that
There's a lot of bloodlust in the pro-life community.
there's a lot of hatefulness I've found. You know, even just like I found going to pray peacefully at an abortion clinic, I think if that is what it was generally, then I would be a lot more apt to do it. But so many cases I've just found so many hateful people in that sphere. And I'm not saying that's across the board. I don't do that all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say that's what happens all the time, but like I think that religious zealousness, if it turns into hate, it's anti-Christian.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's like when I did the March for Life, how many freaking pictures of like bloody and gory fetuses, and I mean, call them babies, call them fetuses, call them what you want. But there was like a weird kind of like, who can make the bloodiest, goriest poster that like, the impulse toward it kind of disturbed me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it went beyond, I feel like there's somebody, if I confronted someone about it, they'll say like, well, we're just showing the horrors of this thing for everyone to see. But there's a certain kind of morbid fascination with violence that is like, lurks behind that creation.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to rag on the pro-life. I did when I was in high school, I did the pray at an abortion clinic thing once. Mm-hmm. And even at the time when I was religious, like looking back, at the time, like I was very uncomfortable with it because like there wasn't like the other side across the fence for me. There was just like a few girls who were like hiding their heads and ducking their heads as they went in. And it's just like, okay, I'm sure like whoever is doing this probably doesn't feel great about it. And so like all I'm doing by standing here is I'm not like preventing this thing from happening. I'm just making people feel really shitty about themselves. And like I feel like it's not good for someone, whether someone does something you believe in or not, like if it's a hard, you know what I mean? That's not the time or place to like make somebody feel like.
Well, I think that I would probably argue against, like, the good, well-meaning Christian. Their hope in going is to actually prevent it. It's not just to shame somebody.
Right. I know that's not like. Right, I'm not saying that like that's the intent of the people there, but that's just kind of what I felt like the product of my presence was there.
Right.
Was like, and you know, it's, I mean, back to like where I feel like pro-life people aren't consistent. You know, if you're really pro-life, you ought to be heavily in favor of social programs that aid new mothers or aid disadvantaged mothers or mothers in poverty. Like, you can't just get mad at somebody for like aborting their baby when like they're going to bring that baby into a world in which they're going to struggle every day to support it.
And you feel like the pro-life movement doesn't really do that?
I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, have the baby and we don't give a shit what happens after.
That's unfortunate. I don't think that's been my experience. But
no. Yeah. So vaccines, abortion, part 2.
The horseshoe.
What do we? I feel like oh, thank you. We got one more thing we can bring up. What else is there? What else has been hot in the news? What's been hot in your life?
No, thank you. I'm good. Ma'am, can I actually have a water at your convenience? Thank you.
What's been going on in your mind? What did you want to bring to the Breakfast is Hell table?
There's a few exciting things going on for me, but I don't, like, world-wise.
You can talk about things exciting for you.
I just got accepted to get my master's in theology at Newman.
Dang.
So I'm going to do that. I'm excited about that. I guess that's kind of the most exciting thing going on for me right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you're getting your master's.
Well, and primarily...
Student debt.
Huh?
Student debt.
Actually, I got a full ride scholarship.
How?
Huh?
How?
Through the diocese. So there's an endowment...
Diocese of Wichita.
The Catholic Diocese of Wichita. Yeah, they have an endowment. Some donor wants people to do it. So, and most of the time, the money's going towards a catechist, an RCIA director, folks who really need to know the faith in order to do what they do. As a secretary, I'm not really high on that list.
But you won't be a secretary after you get your master's, right?
Maybe. I don't know.
What are you hoping to do with your master's?
Honestly, I just think continuing your education is good. And at different points...
Is school really the best place to get an education?
Depends on what you're trying to learn, yes.
Okay.
So if you're trying to learn, in my mind, history, philosophy maybe a little bit.
Can't you just read the books?
I could. If I had the discipline, absolutely. And that's what I was about to say is that post-college, there's been periods of time where I really have had the discipline to continue my education personally. In the last year, it's been very difficult for me to choose that. So my hope is that doing this program, and also I'm extenuating the program longer than what it actually is, so that I'll have more intense weeks and then time off, more intense weeks, because as St. Benedict says, it's not learning in and of itself that we need to seek the love of learning. So
do you think that the education system here in the States is broken?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah, in what way? Like, what's wrong with it?
Because we don't teach kids to love learning.
Yeah?
We want 7 and 8-year-olds to sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day and make them focus. When they're little boys and girls, they don't want it. It's not in their nature. They're not going to be happy. We teach children from a very young age to hate going to school.
Yeah, we do. I also think we don't really teach people to think critically.
Yes, there should be self-discovery, and if there is no discovery and learning, if you're only being fed stuff down your throat, then you're not going to, first of all, take it to heart, believe in it, or
Also, you're not going to be able to like
love doing it in the future.
learning how to learn is almost like an acquired skill. So if you don't never learn how to learn, then like once you're out of the school environment, then you
Yes.
don't know how to accumulate more knowledge.
I mean, that's what so when I was in college,
Maybe we don't want to
say his name.
We'll believe it. We had a relative who was diagnosed with cancer. Yes. Okay.
And his wife was really taking care of him a lot. And she homeschooled 3 of her children. So I was a part-time student that semester. So I homeschooled the 3 kiddos for about 4-ish months. And what I learned about those, like just what their model was, is these kids like taught themselves in a lot of ways. Not to like diminish the homeschooling mother, but these children taught themselves a lot of it. And I think it makes a person way smarter.
Which is also the goal of like the Montessori method, right?
Yes,
In a certain extent.
It's just like knowledge is acquired more by discovery than anything.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with Montessori method. I've read a couple things.
Well, part of my problems with the Montessori method is that basis of it is that the kids choose their own curriculum, and like that is applied at all age levels of it, which like maybe makes sense for like a high schooler or junior high if you give them like some predefined limits of like.
But there are some things that all children need to know.
Right. Well, and also just like a 5-year-old is gonna like, just you know what I mean. Like the 5-year-old, the theory is that like children are naturally curious, so they'll want to like discover things. But everyone I know that has taught at a Montessori school for young kids has despised it because the kids just become incredibly entitled. They become unruly. You can't keep them in line. You don't actually get any learning done.
Really? Wow.
So I don't think it's necessarily the best for younger kids. But I like the idea of homeschooling because I also think just like kids learn through play. And like knowledge, like learning can be a fun thing or like at least not.
Yeah.
Like if you give it like basically anyone that you read that like it talks about how to make do learning better, do teaching better, like they all talk about reinstating the sense of play in the act of learning, and insofar as you can. And as a kid, I feel like like they just want to play.
Yes.
So like, and they're learning when they play. They learn social skills. They learn like motors, like things that also matter.
Things that also matter. This is not even touching on like giving children the opportunity to actually express themselves creatively. I think that the modern day school system, like there is such little room for actual creativity, and not just like creativity, like write your own story but like make up something in your mind that you can act out.
You got to sit in rows. It's funny. Have you ever heard of a guy called Foucault?
No.
Well, he talks about the modern prison system, right? Because it used to be if you got convicted of a serious crime, you would be like tortured, whatever. You'd be, get your arm cut off, and then you'd be let go. And there'd be like a public spectacle. But now we almost have like a more subtle form of like discipline that involves control, right? Like all cells are like designed to face inward toward a center, so everyone can be monitored all the time. And like you're just like, and like literally all your freedom is taken away. And there's like, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm just like trying to summarize Discipline and Punish by Foucault. But he talks about how like that organization of things has also like seemed to leach out to also the school system, which is like if you think about how schools work, it's rows, like it's 5x4 rows of everybody facing the same direction. Like do not fidget, do not turn out of your row. Like
do not speak out of turn.
Right. It's very much like a system of discipline.
Yeah.
Which is like
you can't blame the school systems for having to employ that when one teacher's teaching 25 kids.
Right.
Like, how else could she have classroom management,
Well, and see, something I would do, if I could, like, design a grade school. I tried to do this because I did work at a preschool kindergarten, for a year in Prague, and first year I was there, is eventually I would just, like, let the kids play, and then, like, I would bring the kids over, like, maybe we have an hour of playtime, right? They go play outside. We had 2 people monitoring them, and I bring over a kid for 10 minutes of, like, work, like one-on-one work on a subject.
Right.
Or like we did stations. So like another thing we did is some afternoons we'd have like 5 stations set up, and they would do an activity for 10, 15 minutes. We'd have a timer. When the timer ran off, then they switched stations, right?
Yeah.
So like things that have like a sense of play, that have like one-on-one, that like do small groups, there are ways to do it, but you have to be creative, and it is tough.
Yeah.
Because the kids will get bored if you do the same thing. Yeah. I think that part of the issue is that there's just too many kids in one.
that one adult is supposed to be monitoring that way. Because even, let's say these kids are generally well behaved, maybe that would work. But when kids are coming from extremely broken home lives, when most of their time outside of school is they're stuck to a screen, the amount of discipline they would have to actually, I don't envy the modern day teacher, what they're being tasked to do
Well,
either.
and then like a teacher isn't even allowed to teach anymore. They just need to like
they have to regurgitate.
they get the kids to regurgitate so they can pass certain tests every year, multiple times a year, so that like this institution they work for continues to get funding. Which is one of the great things about teaching over in Europe, is that that's not really a thing over there. So you do kind of have the freedom to design the curriculum you think best, which is like can be horrifying, but also can be freeing in some ways.
Yeah.
It's like when I taught at the grade school / junior high my second year over there, it's like, okay, I can like gauge these kids' needs. I can like, I know quite a bit about English language and like I can like design like what these kids are going to try to do. So, anyway, I don't want to stick on this, but I do think homeschooling, like I think if you are homeschooling and trying to avoid some of this, I think you got to cut it off at junior high level, if not earlier. Because everyone at homeschools later than that just turns out weird, man. How do you feel about like, you can't homeschool a high schooler, man. They turn out, it's like, it's not right.
It's, I'm coming from being single and not having kids and having to make those decisions.
The big, scary outside world and the corrupting influences of modern culture. Must protect my children at all costs.
A little bit, that's a little
so
bit.
So that they all think what I think, because I know everything. Am I right?
I think you're making fun of it a little bit.
I think it deserves to be made fun of.
Okay.
That mentality.
Well, if that's the true mentality of people doing homeschooling that do want to protect their kids, then it does deserve to be made fun of. But I don't think that's the general mentality.
It's the psychological and intellectual version of literally making a plastic bubble for your kid to play in.
Yeah.
And like I think the disadvantages of making plastic bubbles for your children to play in are pretty obvious, and the repercussions of that bubble only expand as the child gets older. And I think the same kind of detriments happen when you put your kids in intellectual and philosophical bubbles of the same sort.
I would just say, socially, sometimes I think people who might be a lot socially awkward is better than being an asshole.
You call me an asshole?
No, I'm not calling you an asshole. I'm saying I don't think there's evidence that supports that. So let's say a kid that's homeschooled their whole life till they're 18 and they go out in the world and they're scandalized by everything. I think that's better than being desensitized to evil. And I'm not saying your original question of like you think that kids you shouldn't homeschool after junior high. I might agree with you most of the way. I wouldn't say definitively because I'm not in the scenario to make that decision. And I think it would depend a lot on where you're at and what schools you have access to. I think that would be a huge part of it. But I would just say I wouldn't necessarily say the socially awkward kid who's scandalized by the world is in a worse boat than the desensitized kid, the kid who's desensitized to what evil is. Because I think that honestly, Jay, a huge part of it is just exposure to pornography. Like, there's no evidence. Like, the evidence... I'm good.
I'm okay,
Thank you.
We're almost done, so.
The evidence that shows how negatively a young child's brain is affected by pornography, and the exposure is getting earlier and earlier. So, if I was in a boat where all I knew is I was protecting my child from being exposed to that, it might be enough for me to choose to homeschool them all the way through.
That is a whole nother can of worms.
I know.
And maybe we'll get into that
At a later date.
on the next time we have Heidi as a guest. But I feel like that's maybe a good place to land for today. So thank you for coming on.
Woo! Thank you for having me.
Yeah, all right. Signing off.